Now, when I was putting this presentation together, give you through my thought processes and also what I'm going to talk about, the sort of subtitle was Moving a Business to Waterfall to Agile. Now, I don't necessarily need to, this type of audience, I don't feel I necessarily need to convince you that Agile is a good thing, because I think most people here are already on board with that concept. But that's essentially what we did, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Also, one of my reasons for putting this presentation together was last year I was here at Agile on the Beach, and I was listening to presentation after presentation, and I asked myself if the technology is going to work. And my PC's now completely died. Hold on. Quit, try that. Are the consultants right? I was sitting here listening to presentations talking about different aspects of Agile and people telling you the great things that you can do, but when you bring this all together, does it actually make sense? Now, I thought I would answer this question pretty quickly before I get shouted off, but essentially, everything is essentially right. But the key thing here is you need to pick and choose the right pieces. You need to do something that matches what your business is trying to achieve. And the bits that aren't working, you need to move away from or adapt. And take that sort of agility and tweak things and see whether those changes are going to improve or, in some cases, make your organization not improve, i.e. fail. So again, the comments that were mentioned this morning during the keynote, we can learn and then go through that continuous sort of innovation and improvement. So the first thing I was going to do, and this is not a product pitch, at the end of the day we sell software to the healthcare industry and other domains, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I thought I would give you a little bit about background of IDBS to put this into context to show you what we were trying to do. So what is our core expertise? Well, our core expertise is delivering software solutions to science, essentially, and we're best known for biology, taking data, performing the data analysis and capturing that from an intellectual property perspective or even from a regulatory perspective. Essentially, we have 250 employees, of which roughly 150 of those are in our head office in Guildford. And that's where I'm from, and that's what we had the biggest impact in initially moving the business to Agile. So in terms of the software solutions, and again, I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail, but our products are all around doing that sort of data analysis. It's all about taking that experimental idea, whereas previously you might record the idea in a paper lab notebook. Now, obviously, businesses want to move electronically so they can capture the data easily and move and make decisions essentially quicker. They're trying to essentially do the same thing that we're doing with Agile, getting that feedback fast so they can move on. And in terms of the areas I mentioned, we work in various domains, but the only real point I've put this slide up is a number of the domains like food and beverage, pharmaceutical, agricultural sciences, etc. They need to record their data so that later on can either be used as evidence in terms of a patent case, a new drug, a new filing or something like that, or more importantly, they need to capture data in a certain way that later on can be posted to the regulatory authorities and proven that they've done the due diligence to make sure that when the doctor walks up to you and gives you that white pill or whatever it might be, that it's actually going to have a beneficial effect rather than a load of horrible side effects or even, can I say, worse, death. So they need to make sure that they've done the due diligence. So one of the things that we are creating software to do is to adhere to a number of compliant domains. Now, All the ones shown on the slide here are very much around sort of drug development, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, such things like good manufacturing practice, GMP or GLP. But essentially, it's all about making sure that you're capturing the data. You know who's captured the data, you know why they've captured the data, and you know when they captured the data. But our customers want to make sure that our software adheres to these. Now, I should say, and this is not for us to, as a software vendor, to get us out of our responsibility, but it is for our customers to make the final decision whether our software meets these. But what they're looking for is that we have processes in place where we can make that demonstration that we do meet the various regulations and we can show them the traceability. Now, underpinning all of this, we also have a very robust, and historically, I'll talk a little bit about this as well, a very sort of bloated quality management system. And that really turns up from the auditors come calling, the auditors make suggestions, and we adapt our process. And normally it's an elastoplast on an elastoplast on an elastoplast. But essentially, we do have a process that has been audited by customers, but also certification bodies, and shown to be robust. And initially, that was very much from our sort of waterfall process. Now that's a little bit about the background. What we're really here to do is talk about what was our move to Agile and what changes did we have to put in place. So this is what we had beforehand. We had a waterfall process. What was good about this? There are some positive things about a waterfall process. There may even be still reasons why organizations in this world still do it. The positives, it was robust, as I already mentioned this. Auditors like paperwork. They like to come in, they like to see a document that clearly describes all the way from the requirement to how the software was modified, to how it was tested, and it was all hunky-dory. And they like to see that. Auditors get very nervous when there's that sort of pause, or when there is you respond, well, I don't know. Because then they start probing further, and they dig, and dig. If you can actually come in and talk very efficiently around what you're trying to do, and the waterfall process does do that, and it's also what they've known for many, many years, then they're very comfortable. The other thing about this waterfall process, and this is more about sort of side effect of us as a software company, we need to be able to know, or our marketeers like to know when they're going to get something so they can do the pizzazz and the splash, etc. And the waterfall process did that. You wrote the requirements right at the beginning, this is what it was going to look like, and at the end, they knew what they could talk about and what they could tell our customers to sell the software. And also you could able to define scope, which is linked to that, in the sense that you could put your package of information together to say we're going to do all of these good things, and it can be marketed. But equally, the negatives. I've already said this, it was a bloated process. In this particular process, I was one of, I still am, essentially one of the product managers, product owners. And I had to do an approval at every single stage of that. Even though I was very heavily reliant on my testers saying that the software has been tested. I just had to go, okay, that's just a rubber stamp. I will be brutally honest, a lot of the approvals was just going okay, because I can't actually comment on, I've got to rely on the data that I'm presented with. So a lot of this was just, to be honest, wasted. The technical experts should be the ones that say that it's okay. And ultimately, yes, it is for the product manager, product owner, to turn around and say, yeah, that functionality meets what I asked for, essentially meets what the business need is. The projects were long, the classical reasons why, waterfall can sometimes fail. As a business, we were trying to be nimble, but that meant change processes, change control on this. So the projects got longer, and classically, the projects weren't delivered on time. Now, really, this is, when we come to the end of it, it was really about sort of expectation management. We still, in the Agile world, we still adapt, we still change. The project's probably still, if you think about the start to the end, if you deliver the same amount of functionality, is still going to take roughly the same amount of time. But it's all about the expectation that you didn't promise something in July and it's December before you deliver it. So it's all about expectation management. Also in this process was everything was siloed. So product management sat as product owners sat as a core, developers sat as a core, and testers sat as a core. And there wasn't that communication. It was chuck it over the fence, which, as we've heard, in many of the talks over the last couple of days, just doesn't work. It can't keep you nimble. And software releases were chaotic. The number of releases where we had the 11th hour and 59-minute bug that just basically brings the whole pack of cards crashing down were too many for me to really say that this process was just anything other than chaos. So what did we do? Well, based that we are a science company, or it's a company that distributes science software essentially, we came up with our essentially Agile requirements. What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve if we moved over to Agile? Well, as a software house, you always, however you measure it, and we could spend years talking about what quality actually means, but everybody wants to improve quality. In reality, I just wanted fewer surprises, if I'm being brutally honest, about having that process suddenly, that 9th hour defect. Releases delivered on time, or at least the expectation that releases are on time. Being more nimble, accepting of change. We were already, having commercial pressures on us and having to change anyway, but really just embracing that. Having teams that were accountable. So I worked on the e-workbook product, and we essentially had 75% of the product delivery organization working on it. It's the biggest product in the organization. So you were roughly talking, when I did a release party, I took roughly 110 people along with me. So what we wanted to do was break that down and having much more nimble groups specifically responsible for something. We wanted less paperwork, less approvals, but ultimately we wanted to be able to still distribute our software to regulated environments and essentially still be able to pass audits. So our change really involved the 3 challenges that we had to address. One was around our people, moving them over to Agile. That actually wasn't too difficult. We piloted Agile for roughly 12 months on a small part of the organization before we took the whole organization over. So people knew what was coming. I should say the developers were all for it, very much up for the challenge, up for the change. Our testers were a little bit conservative. Their first reaction was, how the hell am I going to test it? I'm not going to have all these processes around. You mean you just want to use a story and I'm just going to do some ad hoc testing and I'm not going to have all of the documentation that I currently have now where I can flesh everything out. So there was a bit of work to do there. The product managers, the product owners, my main concern was, how can I know when I'm going to get what I'm going to get so I can get the marketing and the positioning? And is that going to impact how we deliver software or how our customers accept that software? Coming back to the regulated environments, how are we going to, when we get audited, is this whole Agile thing just going to be chucked completely out of the window and we're going to have to go back to square one? Is the business pressures going to be too great? We had to update our process. Cut a long story short, I'll mention this again, we actually jettisoned 75% of the process. The QMS documentation out of the window just went. It was a good excuse. It was faster to write this from scratch rather than adapt what we currently did. And this, we essentially updated this in less than 6 months leading up to the change. And the third thing, we're a commercial business. We had to keep continuity. So the transition to Agile was needed to be, from a customer perspective, seamless. We still had to release our software. So as I said, in leading up to January 2015, which was the go live date, there were lots of presentations, there was lots of update, the communication to our whole organization. This is what we're doing in our product delivery organization. And January the 1st, we were raring to go. The buzz in the organization was second to none. Everybody was on board, still had apprehension, didn't quite know all the answers, but we were all raring to go. A nod out to Alan Kelly. Alan Kelly spent essentially a month with us training everybody in our product delivery organization in their feature teams that we'd set up. The methods of Agile, essentially the sprint cycles, the daily stand-ups, simulating all of that and working with us. That's the other thing with regulated environments. You need to make sure that your personnel are trained and you can demonstrate again to the auditors that they are competent in what they're doing. And we'd already put some processes in place around how we were going to organize ourselves. We decided that we were going, and I'll come back to this, that we were going to use Jira. There were good reasons for that in terms of the traceability and things that we had to put in place. But we'd also decided on our release cadence. So yes, we are taking essentially what have been monolithic desktop applications to the web, and now we're moving them from the web into more of a cloud sort of SaaS environment. And our vision, ultimate vision, is for continuous delivery. But in reality, because the software is used in regulated spaces, there has to be continuity. We can't keep changing the application. So equally, most of our customers, let's be honest, upgrade once a year, if that, because they need to make sure they've got continuity in terms of how the software operates. So what we decided is we'd initially go for a quarterly release train. We would release a new version of the product to our customers, so that's not the same as releasing internally, but a new version of the software every quarter. And we've stuck to that to this day in terms of the quarterly releases.
Excuse me, all I can hear is tippy-tapping keyboards.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Just about. The other thing that we did in terms of our organisation was define a little bit more about the roles and responsibilities. And specifically, I'm going to talk about 3. Firstly, we have product managers, but we made the product manager role more into a commercial strategy and marketing role. Now, you could say that's classically, but historically, before I was essentially looking after, and I'll come to the product owners now and the differentiation that we have internally. But we were looking at how we wanted a group that essentially looks at the long-term vision, what the market is doing, helping our sales, and that's what the product managers fulfilled. We've got a group of product owners, that's essentially the group that I manage, and we were very conscious with the move to Agile that every single feature team needed a product owner. Now, in some cases, the product manager role and the product owner role is the same person. But for some of our bigger applications, they're different. And that's very much from the realization, or very quick realization, that as you move to the Agile environment, the amount of day-to-day effort, and really you could argue this is the same in any software development, you get much better returns with that sort of business person looking at helping the developers, testers, building and testing, essentially testing the software. So we essentially assigned a product owner to every single feature team. But I think the most key thing and the realization that we came across was we now have a specific UX team that sits across all our applications, and they support all of our feature teams. but essentially making sure that our applications were consistent. Prior to this, user experience was very ad hoc, and consequently, the output was very, very mixed. Now, with a specific UX team, in terms of pushing this forwards, we got this. We have a much better output, much better user experience, and much better acceptance. So essentially, the feature teams were born. And each feature team chose its own identity. These happen to be the pirates. We also changed the layout of the office, so they all sat together. And we also updated some of the communication tools that we had within the office, just so we could make the communication work easier across teams. And I'm not going to go through it in much detail, but essentially they all set up their sprint cycle with the view that every, for example, 2 weeks, they would create, we use the word shippable. I don't really mean, again, talked about certainly yesterday, I don't mean the word shippable that it's in its box with its bow. I mean it's a piece of functionality that we can actually say that it's done. It could go to a customer if we wanted it to. But what I'm going to talk a little bit more about are the stories, because this really comes back to the basis of traceability. This really gives us the power of meeting those regulatory needs of traceability. Now, some of the feature teams initially did use, and I have to admit, I do like the touchy-feely cards. It helps, tangibly something to see. But we're a data management company, so we should probably go electronic. But equally, we need to have traceability in terms of the software that we build. So we were using Jira, or we do use Jira. And everything that we do is around the story that we have in Jira. Now, the key things on the story are conditions of satisfaction. You could argue these are the requirements. These are the things that I need that story to do. Now, that doesn't mean we document this to war and peace, but we do have to articulate these are the important things that the story has to meet for it to be essentially accepted. Also in the story, we have a risk-based testing score. This really determines how much evidence do we need. The other thing that we were doing around this is also moving all our testing as much to automation. Classically, it was very manual, quality center testing, people following the scripts. We still do an element of that. But what we needed to do was also up our game and go, actually, some of these stories, if we're just adding a button or coloring a button or changing some typeface on that button, for example, that doesn't need a lot of testing. It certainly doesn't need, dare I say it, lots of evidence and documentation. We can make that very, very light. But equally, if we're playing around with the audit trail, so the software capturing who did what when, which is incredibly important for the regulatory requirements, we better make sure we've got evidence there that says it does what we've asked it to do, because that's what generally the auditors will come looking. Security is the same. Through this same story, we have links to the code change and the review. We're using Fisheye and Crucible because they link together. We have links to the tests, be it manual or automated. We are trying to do all testing now in an automated fashion. Most of our manual testing is just because of legacy reasons, and quite frankly, the cost to move that all to, at the moment, automated, certainly when we're trying to remove part of the application completely as we move forwards, it makes no sense at the present moment in time. Every single feature team has a definition of done, and whilst, again, Agile means people should be able to make up their own minds and drive their own team forwards, there are certain corporate standards that we need to put, that certain things need to be done. But teams can elaborate that or change it or change the language that they want to achieve. And then finally, every team has a product owner, and the product owner has the final say whether the story has been met. That doesn't mean that the product owner says, has the code been written and been reviewed? The story ultimately, when it's gone through all of those sort of checkpoints and the various parts of the team, says that they are happy with the output, that the product owner can go, yes, it meets the requirements. But because this is a feature team certainly working together, there should be no surprises. More or less, these things are just checks and balances going through. The other advantage that we've got around this is when the auditors do come a-calling, they can start anywhere on that cycle, all the way from the conditions of satisfaction, the story, all the way to the functional piece of code, be it the test, and just click through. So they can start anywhere on that path and go up and down that stream wherever they want to. So just by having it all linked together in an electronic world means that we have full traceability. And this is what the auditors, we showed this, and I again, sort of getting to one of my conclusions later on, but essentially you show this to one of the auditors and you more or less get silence back because they can just quite happily see you're answering all their questions very, very quickly. On top of all of this, because it is electronic, is we use it for reporting. So every single release that we give to a customer, we have a report. This happens to be in Confluence, but the Confluence report is then querying directly from Jira. So we've almost automated our reporting, and it updates and live. So every time you open that page, it will tell you whether you've got any issues that are going to essentially affect that release, or we haven't met the various quality gates that we need to go through for that particular release. It just makes our life easier. So we're less doing that sort of manual typing of the documentation. And ultimately, some of these things we just then PDF out, and that becomes part of the release, essentially the release documentation that we can give to customers if they need it. So that gives us all the traceability. But really, how was the dynamics of the feature team? So in our organization, how did this all pan out? Well, we structured the feature teams. In some cases, the feature teams are one feature team to a complete shippable product. Those work very well. They have complete control over their destiny. eWorkbook, I told you there was 110 developers. Well, we didn't create one feature team of 110 developers and testers. We broke that up. Again, I think most of our feature teams come within sort of five, 6 people. We had one large one last year, which we essentially broke into half. But that's about what they work. But we have more than one all contributing to the team. And that caused some essentially interesting behavior. They all became extremely tribal, exactly what they wanted to. They all have their own destiny, in terms of the piece of functional space of the product that they're responsible for. That's exactly what we wanted. That's exactly what we wanted to drive. We wanted that ownership. We wanted it's not my problem, it's my team's problem. We want to make this really, really good. But that itself also has a problem. Incredibly tribal means that they all become very siloed, and they only want to be, they're only interested in their little bubble, but they have actually no idea that another feature team may be dependent on what they're doing. And then finally, a defect comes in, or a piece of functionality comes in that is in the grey area. Is it a sticker book thing? Is it a spreadsheet thing? So you get the feature teams going, it's the hot potato being chucked over the fence. And each product owner of those teams, in some cases, it might be the same person, but in a lot of the cases, it's different people. And therefore, it's going, hang on, why do I want to put that in my backlog? Why should that be more important than everything else that I've got? So we had to deal with these things. So what do we do? Well, we didn't, these scaling agile practices, no, absolutely too heavyweight personally, in my book. What we needed to do is look at this both from a practicality, but also a commercial. Some of these things that fall between the cracks between the teams just need to get done. So how do we address these things? Well, essentially we did three things. One was we had a great big whiteboard put up. This whiteboard is not a Scrum board or anything like that. Each feature team basically has their own column. It is their shop front. Each month we review it. Each feature team talks through what they're doing at a very high level. They talk about whatever big issues, for example, our build servers broken or whatever it might be, that impacts the organization or impacts more than their feature team. That all gets put up onto this board. That does two things. Firstly, where that is positioned in our office, everybody essentially walks past it when they come in or come out of the office. So everybody can see it, everybody can get a rough picture of what's going on. Are there ideas that need to be shared? Are there common things that are happening, etc.? It also highlights if every single feature team is raising the same problem. So for example, one of the things that we used, and Dave Longman talked about it in his talk yesterday, was we used Skype for Business. Now when we started using Skype for Business, it was diabolical. And that was, across that board were red cards that just said Skype. The other advantage of this board is the IT office's door that looks after our infrastructure is right opposite this board as well. So all they saw is the word Skype. And it got resolved. But we can highlight as a business. So this does idea sharing. Okay. We also put in place a release team. Now the release team has representation for all the other feature teams. But if there is that hot potato that needs to be addressed by a particular feature team or overall commercial priority put on it, to say actually that's much higher than what's going on, I wouldn't say it's judge, jury and executioner, but the release team can make that call. By all means.
You said that each team has what's the part of this feature team would be a person who does
Yes.
the release as well.
So on the release team, all the product owners, or in some cases it may be the servant leader instead of the product owner, are a part of the release team. So and then if I dare I say it, I'm one of the people who essentially chair the release team. And if we need to make a commercial call that one thing is much more important, then we can A, decide that that's much more important, and B, we can also decide which feature team, if there's this ambiguity about who's doing what, we can then decide who ultimately takes responsibility for getting it done. Now that's, again, it's not to say that we're just continually overriding what the individual feature teams are doing. That's not what I'm saying. But we are, again, a commercial business that needs to get our software done. So sometimes those commercial calls need to be made. The other thing that we do, and this again comes back to the workbook product that I was talking, we have show and tells, but we actually have show and tells where in this particular room there are 4 feature teams every 2 weeks showing what they're doing. We do it generally under an hour. The whole lot going through, talking about demonstrating all the new functionality. Because what we were finding...
Sorry to interrupt at that point, is when it comes to the release team, I'm just curious to think, is actually is that possibly like more a release planning function of effectively a broader product owner team?
Yes.
Okay, so is there any... Okay, that's good enough for me.
Yes, it is more essentially a planning session, yes. So in terms of going back to the show and tells, we put the feature teams together in terms of their show and tells so they can see what the other teams are delivering. They can also share ideas in terms of what are moving forward. And this has been incredibly effective because you've got some feature teams on there without giving you all the functionality in the product. Some basically may be responsible for getting data in, and then there are some feature teams that are responsible for searching that data. And it's obviously very important that both can see each end of the process, so when the customer gets it, because they don't buy an individual feature team's bit, not in all cases, that it all joins up. It is essentially one product. Go on.
Sure. So is it more for developers or for
Everybody. So what we do is, this is just a small subset. We host this meeting via Skype, and everybody from the product managers to the product owners to all the developers and testers they can either attend it in person or they can dial into the meeting. We also record them, so people who can't see them can come to it later on. We've also started with some of our teams, so the bit that they show, they generally create a video clip, a GIF video clip, that happens to go onto the Confluence page, where we then just play that clip. Because one of the big things we were finding, everybody coming up, sitting down, logging in, demonstrating the software was just taking too much time. And really, they're still showing the bit of functionality that they've worked on, they're still showing ownership, but it's all sort of pre-canned. So they just and then they're all there for the rest of our organization to just click on these things, and they can go and look at them later on, be it sales, be it our professional services organization, etc. So they can come back and essentially it's a log of what's going on if people want to learn about new pieces of the functionality. So what are my take-home messages in terms of, I mean, I've talked about, meeting the sort of regulatory requirements with the traceability, but what are the two things that I would say is really important for Agile efficiency? And this is not, thank you, this is not really, it's not, it's obvious, really. It's communication. Agile's brought everybody closer together. We rearranged the office so the teams were sitting together. So you didn't have development on one side and test on the other side of the office. A feature team was together. That breaks down, breaks down the barriers to communication, and communication occurs. But also, you need to make sure that the communication, not just people are sitting together, that people are actually talking. People are actually sharing ideas. And in our case, where we've got more than one feature team contributing to essentially what we sell, we needed to break down the barriers of communication between the various feature teams. Even if it is just a particular practice or a particular piece of code, can that be reused somewhere else? We have to be able to, we don't want one feature team developing the same piece of code as another feature team, but doing it in different ways. Maybe there's some benefit to that, but equally, if something could just be shared, it's much more cost effective. The other thing is automation. I think if Alan was in this room, he would giggle at me, because he was always saying during the training, automation is incredibly important. But when you're on that 2-week sort of cadence, and I'm a great believer, I love the 2-week sprint cycle, or I call it the 2-week honesty cycle, because every 2 weeks you have to be honest with yourself whether you've achieved or not, or your team, your feature team's achieved or not. But to do that, you need automation. And it really gave us as an organization a big shove in the direction to get automation, be it continuous builds, the nightly builds, to work out whether things are going well or going wrong or whatever it might be, the testing, etc., getting that feedback so we can react in a timely manner. So those are the two things. The other thing with Agile, compared to the waterfall approach in different ways, is Agile's full on. Whereas the waterfall approach, it's peaks and troughs. Ideally you would say it's continuous, but in reality it's peaks and troughs. At the beginning, the product manager's running around like a headless chicken, writing the requirements or working out what they want. The next stage, the developer's running around the headless chicken, but he or she weren't too much involved in the initial sort of requirements. Likewise, and right at the end, and the poor folks at the end, are the testers that just have to pick up the pieces right at the end. And it's this feast and famine. With Agile, it's just 2 weeks, next 2 weeks, next 2 weeks, next 2 weeks. So you've got to be really conscious around your teams. And you need to consciously, and people have been talking about this again, you need to include other activities, be it personal development, or we started doing things like IDBS Create, which is again, similar things that other people have talked about. In our case, roughly once a quarter, the company just stops for a day, and it's all about doing something that just makes our environment easier. We've had in the past songs being created. We've had tools that make our development easier, etc. They're not really designed to, or shouldn't really be used to improve functionality in our products, because that should come through the normal sort of story planning. But it's how can we do things that make the environment that we work in and the tools that we use in our environment much better, essentially much better to do. The teams also have, they have events that they organise themselves. We have, sort of beer drinking events and various other things like that. Again, just to foster those other activities, to take your mind off the fact that every 2 weeks we're going to have another set of stories coming through. So have we improved software delivery at IDBS? Well, the answer is yes. And we've gone through successful audits. We've both been audited by the certification body, and we've also been audited by customers. And generally the process that they're seeing is we've come through that with minimal changes that we need to do. So you can create compliant software using the Agile process. So where are we going now? Well, we're expanding the use of Agile through our business. Our help desk, that's very closely linked to our software delivery, is starting to use the Agile process. They're probably using it more in a Kanban sort of style, but they're having this daily stand-up of looking at the various tickets that are coming through the various customers and determining in a priority order and making sure that the ones that are on the top of that list are being dealt with first, then to the ones that are sort of less so important. We're also looking to expand this. Our professional services group, the group that actually deploys our software or helps our customers deploy it, are wanting to do this, get away from these monolithic deployment projects, which our customers have asked for. They want it all documented, but 6 months later, when they've actually finished, they go, actually, it's not what we want. So many of the pharmaceutical customers are now coming to us and saying, can we do our deployment in an Agile manner? If nothing else, to have that 1 week or 2 week honesty cycle of everybody comes together and everybody decides, is this the right track we are going down? Do we need to make some changes? And we're using exactly the same tools within the whole organization. Again, to make the information sharing much, much easier, to make the information flow through the organization. So a defect coming into the help desk can just easily stream into a backlog. There is a review process that it needs to go through, but it doesn't mean somebody has to retype it in. It just flows through the system. Using Jira. It's actually using Jira linked to Salesforce. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for listening. I will answer any other questions that you might have. And thank you very much for listening.